Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear sisters and brothers. Welcome to another episode of the Radio Resistance podcast. As always, I'm joined here by my dear brother and co-host Zubair John. And today, uh, we'd like to discuss something that has surfaced on all across social media, um, uh, Afghanistan, Twitter, and Facebook, and Instagram, and all that in the last couple of days. And what that was is um, Prince Harry of the United Kingdom. He recently released his memoir in relation to his two tours of Afghanistan while he was serving for the Royal Army. And so the release of this memoir sparked um, quite a bit of reactions. And before we get into the reactions, though, as far as just the headlines that many of you may have already come across. Um, so if you do a little, Google search for those who have not seen or are not aware, you just put in Prince Harry, Taliban, or Afghanistan. You do a Google search, and then you hit the news button. Right, you're gonna see headlines such as Harry's new memoir draws anger and protests in Afghanistan. This is the AP News, Associated Press. Um, Afghans call for Prince Harry to be put on trial after admitting to killing. This is Sky News. Um, and then, you have more just like this, right? As far as the reactions are concerned, there was one specific reaction um, that came in the form of a tweet, and that was by by a sanctioned terrorist by the name of Anas Haqqani. Zabarjan, do you think Anas Haqqani deserves an introduction, or uh,
I mean, well, we know who he is, but I think a lot of people seem to they don't seem to know who he is, right?
valid?
But just to put it short, let's just say he is a terrorist mastermind of one of the most deadliest and largest terror networks in the world, the Haqqani network, right?
Mm-hmm.
So him and his family members, right, his uncle and his brothers, they all have bounties on their head by the FBI and the international community. Uh, I think his brother Siraj Din Haqqani has a $10 million bounty on his head, and all these guys are currently serving as ministers and high officials in the current Afghan government or regime, whatever you want to call it, lack of government. So
Definitely
that's who
not a
he is.
government.
Yeah, no, definitely not a government. So,
Mhm.
I mean, basically, a man that's responsible for the deaths of, you can say thousands upon thousands of innocent people in Afghanistan, um, through their suicide bombings and car bombings and attacks in the past 20 years. So that's who he is.
I
Did you want to? Yeah, did you want to continue on that point?
just to give a few examples of those, Haqqani network attacks
Yes, yes.
in Afghanistan, right? So I guess I'll go in reverse chronological order from 2019. Let's go before the
Just do the big ones
2020.
because there's too many to list. Just
Yeah, okay. So September of 2019, Green Village in Kabul, a blast that killed 30, wounded 100. January 2018, an ambulance bomb attack on the Ministry of Interior in Kabul, 103 killed, 235 wounded. April of 2017, a suicide attack and gunman attack on the Shaheen Army Corps in Balkh, and there was 140 killed, 160 wounded. May of 2017, a truck bomb attack on the German embassy in Kabul, 150 killed, 400 wounded. April 2016, a truck bomb attack on the Elite Protection Force, 68 killed, 347 wounded. And in August of 2015, the truck bomb attack in the Shah Shahid area of Kabul, 15 killed and 200 wounded.
Wow.
Yeah, this is from 2015 to 2019, and just a few of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
Um, what was that? Five or six examples there. And if tallying up the count here with these, just with five or six of these blasts and these examples of their crimes, the total is 506 killed, 1,442 wounded. Okay, so that's
Wow.
who we're talking about, right? Anas Haqqani, as a Azerbaijan, as you mentioned, a mastermind behind these uh, terrorist attacks and plots. Yeah. So he reacted on Twitter, right? And what he said was that just a second while I pull this up. Do you have it pulled up by a chance, Sebastian?
I had it just a second ago, but yeah, you want me to read it?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this was his tweet. He did like a three-piece thread, right? He puts a picture of Prince Harry, and he says, uh, "Mr. Harry, the ones you killed were not chess pieces. They were humans. They had families who were waiting for their return. Among the killers of Afghans, not many have your decency to reveal their conscience and confess to their war crimes. The truth is what you've said. Our innocent people were chess pieces to your soldiers, military, and political leaders. Still, you were defeated in that game of white and black square. I don't expect that the ICC will summon you or the human rights activists will condemn you because they are deaf and blind for you. But hopefully these atrocities will be remembered in the history of humanity." So this is like dramatic, three-piece uh, thread. It's just the audacity. That's what stands out to me. The audacity, and this shouldn't even be a laughing matter. It's because we're talking about lives that were taken, but
It,
it's insane that some of the comments. Let's just read one of the comments from a famous reporter. "You have no right to speak about human rights. Have you ever questioned yourself about the impact of suicide bombings you were responsible for on the families of the thousands of innocent people killed, or the ongoing massacre of people in Panjshir and other northern areas?" So it's like there's just dozens and dozens of these quote tweets and comments saying like, "Are you kidding me right now?"
mhm,
But unfortunately, these dozens of comments are drowned out. There's nothing in comparison to the worldwide reaction, right? The hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of comments, most of them, a lot of them for huge accounts, right? Verified accounts, people outraged at Prince Harry, but
mhm.
citing this tweet or citing his narrative, using the same narrative as him, saying that, how dare this war criminal boast about killing 25 people in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, no attention is paid to this terrorist that we just mentioned. So,
Right. Right.
yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, and those headlines I read out earlier as well. Well, we know that the media is always going to just, the headlines are based on what can sell, what will sell, right? And
Mhm.
so those are probably, yeah, the most attractive headlines to get more readers and viewers and so on, right? But uh, those headlines, this reaction, tons of other reactions, actually don't do any justice to what Prince Harry conveyed actually in his memoir. I think it would be a good idea. I've pulled it up right now for us to also read that before we go into the reactions, more of those reactions, right?
So you're
So
saying we should explain the context, you're saying, if there was
exactly,
any.
exactly, yeah. And the point of bringing up the media was exactly that, because usually, in most cases, things aren't contextualized, right? And for such a matter, especially. The context is very important. So, yeah, what Prince Harry actually said was that, just quoting this straight from the memoir itself, right?
Yeah, go ahead
He
and read
said,
it.
yeah, so he says, Afghanistan was a war of mistakes, a war of enormous collateral damage, thousands of innocents killed and maimed, and that always haunted us. So my goal from the day I arrived was never to go to bed doubting that I'd done the right thing, that my targets had been correct, that I was firing on Taliban and only Taliban, no civilians nearby. I wanted to return to Britain with all my limbs, but more, I wanted to go home with my conscience intact, which meant being aware of what I was doing and why I was doing it at all times. Most soldiers can't tell you precisely how much death is on their ledger. In battle conditions, there's often a great deal of indiscriminate firing. But in the age of Apaches and laptops, everything I did in the course of 2 combat tours was recorded, time stamped. I could always say precisely how many enemy combatants I'd killed, and I felt it vital never to shy away from that number. Among the many things I learned in the army, accountability was near top of the list. So, my number, 25. It wasn't a number that gave me any satisfaction, but neither was it a number that made me feel ashamed. Naturally, I'd have preferred not to have that number on my military CV, on my mind, but by the same token, I'd have preferred to live in a world in which there was no Taliban, a world without war. Even for an occasional practitioner of magical thinking like myself or like me, however, some realities just can't be changed. While in the heat and fog of combat, I didn't think of those 25 as people. You can't kill people if you think of them as people. You can't really harm people if you think of them as people. They were chess pieces removed from the board, bads taken away before they could kill goods. I'd been trained to otherize them, trained well. On some level, I recognized this learned detachment as problematic, but I also saw it as an unavoidable part of soldiering, another reality that couldn't be changed. So that's the actual statement, or that's what
Hmm.
Prince Harry actually said, right? Um,
That that sounds a lot different than just a one-liner that we see. But
right, and in even in some of those, I guess, phrases that this terrorist Haqqani cherry picked from this part, right?
mhm.
Um, none of that was a response to what Prince Harry was actually saying, right? Um, so yeah, now that that's clear, right? What is it like? So where what's the actual issue here? What is the problem? Well, we already know that the media, as we said, to sell, they're going to have to, they push certain headlines and so. But the people, who are these people who are more outraged by Prince Harry speaking about his experience, and those experiences, or reading from the actual memoir, you see it's a real human being with a conscience writing, right, and
Who's
sharing his
honest?
experience. It's the honest truth and honest experience, right?
Meaning, like he didn't. He could have sugarcoated that way more if he wanted to, but it was. It seemed he was truthful in the sense that he said, "This is a war that has collateral damage. That bad things happen and stuff." He could have easily. There are people that are in the army and that fight and stuff. They won't mention these things. They won't admit to these things. But
uh,
he set that up first. And then he said, that being said, I made sure when I came in that I wanted to have a clean conscience and I wanted to do things right. But I guess the question comes, and I'm sorry if I cut off a point that you were trying to make. I hold on to that thought. I guess the question would be: so, is there ever a justification to maybe this type of a war, or like can an enemy, if you actually have enemies that you're fighting, wouldn't you call them a chess piece? Technically, this is, you would think of the battlefield as a chessboard, and the good guys, which you're on the side. If you claim to be on the side of the good guys, you're on this side of the board, and the enemies are the chess pieces on the other side. And the whole point of this is to defeat each piece, every pawn, and then get to checkmate.
Right.
So it's just an analogy, but then people seem to simplify this, and they say, well, um, he said 25, he killed 25. 25 what, though? So let's get into that. We'll go into the details of that. But what was
Yeah.
the point you were about to make?
No, it is just a bit of what you've said right now. Which, just to continue on that, I think that not only is the analogy, spot on, but he was actually being, as you also alluded to, that it's kind. It's a very nice way of putting things, right? Uh, 25.
Considering who he's talking about, yeah.
Exactly. And even towards the end of this, the last paragraph, right? He admits to, he says that I recognize this learned detachment, right? The training of to otherize your enemies, right? As problematic, but I also saw it as an unavoidable part of soldiering. Another, and what was the first reality that couldn't be changed? Exactly what you said, Zubair John. These are like collateral damage is a natural part of war, right? But that's not even what Prince Harry was speaking about in relation to his 25, right? These were Taliban terrorists, right? Um, the point that I wanted to address was actually, I think, one of the causes or reasons for why this is even more prevalent, or why we're seeing such selective outrage today. There's, it's multifold. I'm sure there are plenty of reasons, but one of the things that is very dangerous, and it's happening right now as we speak, it's continuing to happen. It's this idea that started, that has been promoted ever since the fall of Kabul and the US and NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. And that's this idea that there's such a thing as good terrorists and bad terrorists. This is a narrative that's being pushed by certain institutes, think tanks, governments, individuals, scholars, right? That, hey, in relation to Afghanistan specifically, there's this group of terrorists who, we should be engaging with, right? Whatever happened to, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't negotiate or deal with, you know. So I think that that's
Or
one. Mm-hmm.
yeah, like they're alluding to a good, there's a good portion of the Taliban. That's what you're trying to say, right? There's a good Taliban and bad Taliban, right? That's what they're trying to make this distinction, right? But do they ever do that with ISIS when they were fighting them in Syria and Iraq? I don't think so. Did they ever
Absolutely
do that
not.
with Al Qaeda? Did they say, "Oh, these are the good Al Qaeda. Those
Mm-hmm.
that faction's the bad one. So we'll talk to the good ones." No,
Mm-hmm.
because their ideology is bad, and they all carried out the same bad things. Terrorists doesn't change; they remain terrorists, right? They have a certain ideology.
Right, and
So,
in the current group that we're talking about, as far as the quote unquote good Taliban, right? Who are they? Again, they're the sanctioned uh, terrorists with bounties on their heads, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, from Sirajuddin Haqqani to the little bro with the less of a bounty on his head. I think Sirajuddin's is 10 million, and the
Yeah.
little bro terrorist Anas's bounties maybe 5 million or something of that sort.
Yeah, a few of the other
Yeah.
ones they have like 5 million. It's not as
Yeah.
much. So,
Hey,
but
it's still worth it for sure. Anyhow, so yeah, I think that that's just one of the reasons, and we see that as far
sure.
as the Biden administration today here in the U.S. is really has been pushing that narrative, right? Um,
So that's like the political reason, though. That's in terms of like government policies, right? I would say that's one of the political reasons. But then when it comes to the common masses, what would you say one of the contributing factors to this type of outrage? What is it? Why do people have this selective outrage with this?
Very simply put, I think that the vast majority of those who are reacting similarly to Anas Haqqani
Yeah,
are blinded by this very single minded approach when looking at the issues of Afghanistan, and that's coming from this anti imperialist lens. And don't get me wrong, it's not that we're not against imperialism. Azerbaijan, are you for imperialism or colonialism? These three,
no, of course not. These are negative things that we denounce.
100%, absolutely, right?
Yeah,
But the issue is that we see masses today looking at specifically the issue of Afghanistan. This applies to many other issues, right? But they're
mm.
only looking at it from this very narrow lens of, well, you know, America and NATO, the US and NATO are out of Afghanistan now, so victory, right?
The
Where
occupiers are defeated. The imperialists are defeated. These generalizations, these kind of sensational claims, right? That we defeated the occupiers. But go ahead. So you're saying
exactly,
it's imperialism kind of taken too far, anti-imperialism taken too far.
exactly. And then I guess that political reason, it reinforces this for those who are already seeing things from this, very narrow lens, right? Um, yeah, so that's I think that's the underlying reason. And I think that a really good way to illustrate or um, back this is by just simply going over those reactions, seeing some of them, right?
Mm,
I have a couple pulled up here,
sure.
but it's gonna take a minute for it to load. Let's see. Um, you have any of them
Uh,
loaded up?
you were
Sorry.
gonna were you gonna pull up the reactions that the outrage reactions?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Uh,
let's start with one here. So this guy, 14,000 followers. Um, he's like the head editor of that page called Five Pillars, right? Um, Taliban apologist. We'll make that clear. But what he says, Prince Harry says he killed 25 Afghans when he was a helicopter pilot during the Western occupation. The NATO invasion and occupation of Afghanistan was a massive war crime, and Prince Harry is a criminal. 846 likes, 200 retweets. So that's a small one. Uh, you got any other pulled up? Let's pull
uh,
up Ali
yeah,
Abu Nima, right? The
yeah.
famous Palestinian activist, right? 145,000 followers.
Mhm.
It's sad because look, Palestine, we're on the forefront. We stand with our brothers, right? But look what he says. Unbelievable that anyone could portray this monstrous, murderous psycho or anyone in this family as victims. He should be extradited to Afghanistan for trial. Prince Harry says he killed 25 people in Afghanistan. 4,000 likes, 1,700 retweets, unlimited comments. That's just two examples. There's just dozens of the like hundreds of on Twitter. But I know this was being shared across like Instagram, Facebook. Everyone was having a field day with this, saying like that the outrage all of a sudden, right? We have 20 years of terrorists doing what they did. They didn't change. Those same terrorists are in power now. So a year and a half of them doing their terror activities, oppressing the people of Afghanistan. These people, not a word is raised on that. But then the minute it's like one of these Prince Harry kind of claims come out, or like what was the other last thing that happened? When Joe Biden gave the Afghan funds to 9/11 families, like stuff like that, which okay, that's wrong, but like that outrage is so selective. It's only when the West does something, a report from the West, whether it's
Yeah.
a collateral damage report or something like that, all of a sudden up in arms and just outrage, But then when it's these reports that the Taliban are doing crimes and all these other things, nothing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, in the past 1.5 year alone, right? If
yeah,
I don't have that all tallied up right now, and I don't have the list of all of the killings that did occur, but I mean, just do a hashtag search on Twitter with Afghanistan alone. You'll see all of it.
yeah,
But just I guess I had one pulled up over here too. Let me share this.
read it.
Um, and then I'd like to make a comment about these profiles that you mentioned as well, right? There's another similarity or commonality I see amongst or between these tweets. This one's
Sure.
um, I'll go ahead and omit the name. Uh, but anyway, so it's a page with that also, it received 51,000 impressions, 900 likes, 206 retweets. Prince Harry says he killed 25 Afghans when he was a helicopter pilot during the Western occupation. The NATO invasion and occupation of Afghanistan was a massive war crime, and Prince Harry is a war criminal. Not a
Blue check
single,
mark.
missing the blue check mark, but you know,
No. The
anyway.
other ones I had him. All right.
Yeah, but big enough page, big enough platform. Those numbers are, um, and
Huge.
then yeah, huge. And then when you see the comments beneath the um, post and tweet as well, you see, and
Mm.
yeah. But that commonality, that thing, right? That another thing I see in observation. Many of these reactions, a lot of these feelings and sentiments, I see it more prevalent amongst our beloved Ummah, with it
Mm.
coming from our dear brothers and sisters in faith, our Muslim brothers
Yes.
and sisters. And that's the part that bothers me the most. You know, those pacifists out there who think that, in response to brutality and oppression and tyranny, we should just, say, just be hold up the peace sign or anything like that. I'm not here to talk about them. That's a different matter. We can leave that for another time, right? But I see these sentiments, these feelings coming from mostly from Muslims, right?
Right.
Muslims who support the cause of the Palestinians. But for some odd reason, when it comes to what's happening in Afghanistan, we see no outrage there, right? And as far as the common lay and masses are concerned, the expectation isn't too high there either. Everyone's busy with their daily lives, and you're looking and the information you receive nowadays, attention spans are very short. You look at headlines and that's all, right? I think who's to blame here really is our scholars. Where is the outrage? Where has the outrage been in the past year and a half from Muslim scholars in relation to who is not governing, right? He started the episode with trying to figure out what's the best term to refer to these terrorists who are terrorizing the people of Afghanistan. Which other
Yeah.
Muslim country can women not go to school? Women and girls are not allowed to go to school. What else needs to happen? There's an ongoing genocide. Women aren't allowed to go to school. The list just is a never-ending list of crimes and atrocities that are being committed by the same group that all of a sudden now you're sympathizing with. You're not sympathizing with the Afghan nation. You're not sympathizing with people from Afghanistan. You're sympathizing with terrorists, right? What? Because the US is no longer there. So now you're all of a sudden parroting the exact same narratives that these terrorists are, right?
Right. Right.
So yes, this is just absolutely insane. It's absurd.
Mm.
I don't know how else to express this. other than, calling a spade here. This is insanity.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zubair.
They, no, no,
Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
exactly how I feel. That's my biggest gripe, my biggest complaint from August 2021, right, till now, August 15th, when the Taliban came into power. It wasn't. It's not even. It's nothing other than not the policies of the world. It's not even the actions or whatever. My biggest gripe is also what happened to our own people, supposedly, that we go out and we protest for their causes, whether it's the Rohingya, whether it's the Uyghurs, right, whether it's the Palestinians, right, the cause for Palestine. We were the people of Afghanistan, whether we're in the diaspora or in Afghanistan, we stood with all these oppressed folks, and we just thought that, okay, the day that this happens, people will stand by us just like we stood by them. But everyone disappeared. Everyone. This is complete utter silence from the Ummah, right? And the fact that this is coming from the scholars is what makes the common masses stay silent. Is because till this day, have we seen one statement of condemnation from a single popular, celebrity scholar, like a single one on whether it's on social media or in person at a mosque? Nothing. Zero. Not a single comment, not a single condemnation from any of these scholars. And there, we're supposed to be for justice. That's what Islam is all about. You speak for justice, even if it's against your own self, against your own family, against your own people.
It's
You
commandment of
speak
the
out.
Quran. Yes.
Right. So it's like when it comes to all these other causes in the world, there's outrage. But if for some reason, and this is where it ties in, this whole anti-imperialist thing. When it came to Afghanistan, August 15th, we either saw people celebrating, like encouraging this and admiring that the Taliban have come into power and the U.S. is out, or we've seen complete silence. And they, what people need to understand is those people who are silent, those scholars, they need to put themselves in the shoes of the people of Afghanistan or the diaspora who feel completely betrayed. When the Taliban are carrying out these un-Islamic actions in the name of Islam, in the name of Sharia, right? And the people are
Mhm.
helpless, and no one's coming for their no one's hearing their cries. Do you know how much that turns those people away from Islam? They don't have jobs. The men can't work. Women are completely erased from society. The girls can't go to school. A young girl is going to be like, what is she going to think? She's going to say, these guys, these mullahs, this is supposedly the religion to them. And they're saying, if this is the religion, I don't want this. These people are creating a generation of atheists in this country. And they
100%.
think that, and they think their silence is going to benefit this. What is the reason for the silence? Is it just because America was defeated? Meanwhile, you're living in America because NATO was defeated. Meanwhile, you're living in all those NATO countries, right? In Europe.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of logic is this? Or is it because if I speak up, oh, that probably means there's going to be another invasion, another 20 years of war? But why can't we discuss this? Why can't they at least bring it up and say, look, this is not right. Banning education is against Islam. This when the Taliban claimed general amnesty, there's been reports of that. There is no general amnesty. This is published. It's not. I think the excuse can only go so far where they say we're not aware. Oh, we weren't on Twitter. I didn't know about this. That can work for maybe the common masses, but like, no, if as a scholar of Islam, you have the responsibility to be aware of what's going on in the Muslim world. And when you see what's happening, you have to assess and analyze the situation. You need to do some research. You can't just look at what the Taliban say. They're establishing Sharia. MashaAllah, Alhamdulillah. This is great. The Sharia, the Khilafah is established. This is nonsense. You know,
Right.
we have to look at the oppression, the zulm that's happening in Afghanistan. We're not again. Sorry, I got sidetracked. The general amnesty. How many soldiers did they kill? How many former members of the government did they kill till this day? I think it was a New York Times article said at least 600.
Yeah.
Those are the
But that was
reported ones.
yeah, and that was back in like more than 6 months ago,
Yeah,
established.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And who are they killing? They're not killing American soldiers as if that's a valid thing to do. Anyway, who are they killing? They're killing Muslims here. They're oppressing Muslims. They're not allowing Muslim girls to go to school. They're not allowing Muslim men to work in their positions that they had for stupid things like, oh, we're banning ties. You can't wear a tie to work. This is a mockery of Islam. Yet
Right.
the scholars are praising this. They're staying quiet. They're like, we don't want to say anything because they're establishing the Sharia. Let's let them do it.
Zubair, I cannot help myself but to remember something from history right now when you brought up that great point in relation to a generation of atheists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coming into existence. Well, uh, so I think that this started actually back in with the coming of the Taliban, with the form when the Taliban were formed. But ever since 2021 and the fall of Kabul, up until now, I think that we're seeing this an exponential increase of exactly this phenomenon, right? Um,
Right.
and what this just reminded me of right now, because if we take this a step further, right, if the reason is what you mentioned as far as well, the fear of, oh, another invasion from the west happening and so on and so forth, well, hey, dear Muslim scholars, are you aware, did you know that there are Muslims in the mountains, there are Muslims in the mountains resisting this tyrannical rule, this terrorism that's happening in Afghanistan? They're resisting it. Did you know that? They absolutely know, without a shadow of doubt, right? What is the reason for silence there? And what is it that it reminds me of? Sayyid al-Shahada, Imam al-Hussein, alayhi salam, the grandson of the Holy Prophet of Islam, faced the exact same circumstances in the tragic event of Karbala on the day of Ashura. And just as you said, um, the commandment that's it's a commandment from the Quran, from Ahadith, that we stand in the face of oppression and injustice, no matter how many are with us, no matter who it may be, right? And one of the striking similarities, another striking similarity between this historical event, which we should be learning from, right, and today's resistance in Afghanistan as well, is it's in relation to exactly what this phenomenon is. Some ask this question of, well, the corrupt and evil tyrant of that time, this person by the name of Yazid, he was from Bani Umayyah. He was the son of uh, someone else who was also, arguably, but I mean, most scholars would agree, I think, that Muawiyah, his father, was also, a corrupt individual, right? But why is it that, well, there was no rebellion or standing against injustice during that time, right? And from my understanding of looking at uh, history here, Islam was not at stake during that time. But when um, Sayyidina Hussein uh, stood and rose against Yazid, Islam was at stake, right? I've seen this narrative kind of pushed on Twitter that amongst those who are actually supportive of the resistance and those who um, do not support the Taliban, they're not Taliban lobbyists or sympathizers, but they say, oh, no, Islam is not in danger and so on and so forth, right? I mean, in an absolute sense, of course it's not, right? Um, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the truth no matter what, right? But in Afghanistan, and in relation to whether it be diaspora or people there in Afghanistan, every single day, there are people denouncing their faith entirely.
We see that on Twitter, right?
We see it on Twitter. I see it in real life.
In in real life.
Individuals who have come here,
Mm.
who have come here, very practicing Muslims. Um, as soon as their foot they step foot into these lands, wherever it may be, they denounce their faith, and it has nothing to do with you know the freedoms that they now have, because they had those freedoms, especially if we go with the Taliban's narrative. Well, it was even worse in Afghanistan before their coming, right?
Yeah, so you're
Than
just
the
saying that
West.
you're saying they didn't get corrupted by coming to the West by the
Absolutely
democracy
not.
and liberal values and stuff.
you know Whether or not that plays a role, or that is the case or not,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a whole different that's a whole different discussion. But the relevance, the direct connection, it's a cause and effect relationship. It's not a correlation here. With the rise of terrorist groups, and not just their rise, but the lack of condemnation coming from within the Ummah, within our from our Muslim scholars, and people losing their faith, right? There's a cause and effect relationship. One day, every single one of these scholars will be asked, why did you not stand up in the face of this oppression and tyranny? Why did you not support the Muslims who did stand? Another one of those narratives, as far as uh, whether it be institutes or whether it be governments here, especially from you know President Biden allowed for this narrative, this false narrative, to be pushed, that the Afghanistan's national defense and security forces just fled, which is simply not the case and not the truth. Um, we have discussed that in I think, one of our first episodes on the Radio Resistant podcast, and in the future, I think we should talk about this more as well. But so that's uh, clearly not the case when we see every single day more of these the former National Defense and Security Forces joining the NRF. Just less than 2 weeks. It's not even been 2 weeks that Commander Andarabi was martyred. Who was he? He was someone who during his whole life, he was from Afghanistan, a Muslim who was fighting against these evil forces, right? And he was martyred. How many of our Muslim scholars from the Ummah came out and tweeted about his martyrdom?
Yeah, so let me add to that. Because some people might say, well, why is this resistance, fighting the Taliban? Why are they fighting this Islamic state, supposedly, right? Well, this is what they need to understand. Why this is the resistance? Are these people not Muslims? Do they not want an Islamic country? Of course they do. But here what they don't understand is the Taliban are clearly doing things, right? Forcing these people to the point where they have no choice but to pick up weapons and to defend themselves. I think there's the one verse in the Quran where God says in chapter 22, permission is granted to those who are being persecuted, since injustice has befallen them, and God is certainly able to support them. They were evicted from their homes unjustly for no other reason than saying, our Lord is God. Right? So, and then in
Mm-hmm.
other verses, it says, you may fight in the cause of God against those who attack you, but do not aggress. Surely God does not love the aggressors. So these verses are cited by the resistance forces. They don't just, this isn't some liberal movement where they're like saying, we don't want Islam, we want democracy. No, these are like faithful practicing Muslims who have ulama, scholars amongst them, who cite these verses when they're up in the mountains and then they're, posing with their guns, and you see them, defending themselves. They read these verses in Arabic, and they know what they're saying, right? But what are the reasons that they're fighting? Again, first of all, we see just girls' education is just the tip of the iceberg. Like literally, when they show you ever see the pictures where they show an iceberg, right? It's in the ocean and just the tip is sticking out, but then the bottom of the iceberg, right? It's like, what is it, a diagram or something?
Mhm.
They show the bottom that's not visible in the
Right.
ocean.
Right.
The tip of the iceberg that the media and everyone discusses and shows is girls' schools. That's all. That's all they show. Girls' schools are closed. Secondary schools have been closed. Universities are banned. What's all on the bottom that people don't see? Let's start with the forced displacements, right? We see the Taliban forcing people out of their homes in Daikundi, right? The Hazara people forcing them out of their homes, burning their houses. There's video evidence of this, multiple reports from different agencies showing this, right? It's been happening for many years, but we've seen it in the past year and a half. There's multiple reports of this. We see them doing it uh, against the Tajiks and Uzbeks in Badakhshan and Takhar, right, in the north of Afghanistan. We see them expelling people from their homes in Panjshir. We see them doing it all throughout the north, Andarab. So they're literally telling people, you going to the houses of who? Muslims, and saying, you need to go.
Right.
We're taking over this village. You can't live here. We're going to give this to our soldiers or our people from such and such areas. This is crazy. This is the definition of oppression. Literally, it's what that verse is saying. Driven out of their homes for what reason? And God says you have permission to fight. So don't tell me that these are some bugha, right? These rebels that are fighting a just Islamic state. No, no, no. So that's just one aspect of it. Forced displacement, girls' education. We mentioned men have been completely. They can't go to their jobs that they used to have because that previous government was in alliance with the infidels. So like a poor, like my uncle, for example. I don't know if I'm putting anyone's. I hope I don't. Well, I'll just mention one of my uncles back in Afghanistan worked for like a local ministry, agriculture. Fired. That ministry's been shut down. He doesn't have a job. That was all he knew. He can't work anymore because that was part of the infidel government. That's out of order now.
So lies. The Doha agreement, right? They've how many? I mean, the international community is coming to the
Right.
same conclusion that they haven't abided. They're not abiding. The general amnesty was a lie. All of this hypocrisy and lie, right?
Oh yeah, let's talk about general amnesty. What was general amnesty about? Anyone that worked with the previous government, be it government workers or be it ANDSF, the security forces, army, police officers, that they'd be forgiven,
Yeah.
as if they committed crimes that they need to be forgiven, right? It's like, oh, we're gonna forgive you guys, even though we blew you guys up with suicide bombings and we killed your family members and stuff. We're gonna forgive. There's gonna be amnesty. We're gonna forgive you. But that was a lie too.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw in that one New York Times article, what was it, 600 people, and this was like, what did you say, 6 months? This was like 6 months ago or
Something
something,
like
right?
that. But look. So, right, John. Not. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I need to over here. Just say something.
Do it,
Okay.
please.
Look, this list is going to be never ending. This could go
Yeah,
on
yeah, you're right.
forever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Look at it from this aspect. For those, those who are think that for some reason that this isn't legitimate, a legitimate struggle or whatever, right? Whether we look at the Taliban, this reformed 2.0 version that came into power in 2021, or we go back to 94 when they were first formed, who were they fighting? Who did they launch their war against? Right? The Taliban
Right.
came to fight a a Islamic government, an Islamic republic at that time, and an Islamic republic in 2021. Now, let's say they say, well, the Americans came, the West came, and there was nothing Islamic about this government in the past 20 years. What about in 94? Who Who were the
Mhm.
founders, the founding fathers of that newly established government, which had internal legitimacy and legitimacy from the international community? They were the same mujahideen, those who fought the Soviets out of Afghanistan, right?
Yes.
This is
Yes. And
they came to into existence to fight Muslims. This is the group we're talking about.
the ironic part is when you mentioned Mujahideen, the Muslim world praises this group, right? Against what they achieved against the Soviet Union.
At that
So
time,
it's like,
at that time
yeah,
they came to they came to our assistance, right? Because
right.
again, going back to the original point of this discussion, they were uh, well, Eastern, not Western necessarily, right? But foreign, right?
Who?
The
Who?
Soviets, as far
Oh,
as
okay, yeah.
the Ummah coming to the aid of uh, the people of Afghanistan, during that time, right? But as far as answering this question, for those who would question the legitimacy of this resistance, right? Now, from a whole different perspective as well, right? So the atrocities and all of this, we know that these are terrorists that we're resisting against, right? But from a whole different another point as well, in terms of legitimacy, right? Okay, let's say the Taliban say, we don't care about international recognition, which clearly they do, right? But let's say assume for a moment that that is the case. What about internal legitimacy? Does a
Hmm.
Islamic government not require legitimacy from amongst your own people, right? When I don't remember when the Taliban, took a vote to see if whether or not um, the people wanted them to be ruling over them. That never happened.
Or like a pledge of allegiance if
Of
you want to go old school,
old,
like a bayat.
yeah,
Since when did the people line up and put their hands in their hands and say, "I pledge allegiance to you"? No. So,
yeah. Whether any form of democracy or the people's will or the people's granting them this legitimacy, that never happened, right? So
mhm.
from ground up, there's uh, plenty of uh, not just reasons, but it becomes an obligation. If we're looking at it from the Islamic lens, from an Islamic perspective, it's our duty, it's an obligation to stand up against these terrorists. And it's
Yeah.
and it's mind blowing. It's just crazy to think that we have to come out and explain this today, like after ISIS, right? What differentiates the Taliban from ISIS? How? In what sense? They do exactly. You just mentioned a quarter, a few of the atrocities they've committed in this past year and a half alone. Today actually
Right. Right.
marks the day um, of the Yakalang massacre.
Yep.
It's an ongoing genocide. The Hazaras are being genocided. Back then, there was no ISK or any other groups that they can point the finger and say, "Hey, it was them." No,
Yeah.
this was conducted by the Taliban. UN recognizes this. There's plenty
Right.
of look it up. Yakalang massacre, Hazara
Or
genocide, right?
or what they did in Mazar Sharif in 1998, the massacre of Mazar Sharif. People don't know. People forget about that one.
Mm-hmm.
I had family there, and they attest to this. They remember this. Oh my God, the bloodbath that occurred in 1998 in Mazar Sharif. That was against Hazaras and Tajiks. It was indiscriminate killing. And this is reported. It's all over. If you go look at the archives, it's reported. Human Rights Watch, different organizations, people, testifying to what happened there. And what was the excuse then? Because now some people are going to justify, oh, they were fighting the Americans, they were fighting the imperialists, the colonizers, NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Who were they fighting then?
Right.
Who were they massacring in 1998? Muslims, right? Just like they massacred Muslims for the past 20 years with all those suicide bombings that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So,
And that verse of the Holy Quran you just recited, or the translation of, right?
yeah.
So there's that verse, right? And very relevant to this topic of resistance, right? Now, the other very popular verse of the Holy Quran that we hear many times when that verse from Surah Ma'idah, the fifth chapter of the Holy Quran, verse 24, I believe, or sorry, no, verse 32 of chapter 5, um, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the taking of a single life is like that of taking the life of all of mankind, and the preservation or saving one life is like saving all of mankind, right? Where do we see this principle, this Quranic principle, manifested in more? With the Taliban, it's zero. They don't care about innocent or non-innocent, and they just kill. But
Yeah.
look at the resistance. Those Muslims, right? What you mentioned, uh, prisoners of war. I think you.
I didn't even get to that part actually. That's when you're like the list is too long.
I,
That we didn't even mention. Yeah, when they
but
captured these fighters, actually ordinary people, some of them, but some of them are were from remnants of the ANDSF. But basically, these people who are resisting against the Taliban, they must have been ambushed or whatever, and they got caught, and they lined them up, no weapons in hands, right? Their hands are tied behind their back, blindfolded, and they lined these people up. They must have been 30 in that one video. There's multiple videos of these different occasions, and they just started shooting all of them, all while saying, takbir, Allahu Akbar, massacring Muslims.
yeah, the
Where were
other
you
side.
going with that?
Look, what happened with what is the
Oh
treatment? What
yes,
is the treatment of prisoners when the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, when they how did
when they captured the
when they
Taliban.
captured the Taliban, how did they treat them?
Oh man, it was as if, like, when you were seeing it, it was as if you were reading the hadith, as if you were reading the seerah, the biography of the Prophet, peace be upon him. They were, first of all, feeding them. They were making sure that they were okay, giving them food and water. And they were saying it also. They're saying, we're going to free these people after, we're locating where they're from. They gave them, in one instance, they gave them money to be able to, for transportation to go back to their families,
Yeah,
saying, do not do this again, and go back to where you came from,
subhanallah.
freeing a prisoner of war. This is all in line with the the practice and the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him and his family. But
Mhm.
what did they do?
Mhm.
Oh, what I just mentioned before, just slaughtering Muslims. And then remember that one video where, man, he's dragging that one guy that he killed, and he has like the selfie camera on,
Yeah.
and he's just dragging him downstairs, down these steps, like a bloody body that he just shot and killed, and he's like, Alhamdulillah, praise to God that I just killed this. I don't know what he called him, an infidel or whatever. This is the Taliban. People, if you're not aware of this, then maybe you need to start speaking to people, or you need to become, do research. Go onto Twitter. These videos are all there. We're not making this up.
Yeah.
Multiple examples of this.
Yeah. And
So
it just
I'm gonna end there. Go ahead.
I'm just going to end with this one verse of the Holy Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. So there's two audiences that I'd like to speak to when I'm referencing this verse here.
Mhm.
One, firstly, in relation to what we were just discussing as far as the resistance and all that, the resistance in Afghanistan is concerned. So this verse, well, first of all, let me translate it. Verily, the mu'minun, the believers are brothers of one another. So reconcile with one another. إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. And have taqwa so that you may uh, be of those who receive Allah's mercy, right? So a lot of
Taqwa means fearing God,
fearing, yes,
being conscious of God.
yes, and so many, come out and say, well, hey, in relation to what's happening in Afghanistan, well, you have these Muslim brothers and these Muslim brothers, so just make peace with one another. No, that's not what the case is. Just as Zubair John said, you need to go out and do some more reading if you're truly, just simply unaware or whatever it may be. In today's day and age, I can't see how that could be the case, but that these are not mu'minun. I don't want to put any labels or terms or anything on them, but they're certainly not mu'minun or our brothers. They're seeking mu'minun blood. That's what they were created for. That's what their whole existence is about. This is the group we're talking about. Now, the other um, uh, point that from this verse that I'd like to make is, oh, Muslim scholars, oh, Ummah, where are you? Where are you when it comes to Afghanistan? America's left, just taking this back. NATO's out. In fact, it's through humanitarian aid and to prevent, in order to prevent the humanitarian catastrophe and crisis to get any worse, money is being handed to these terrorists, and they're misusing and abusing these funds, right? But what about the Ummah as far as finding a real solution? That option is there. It's not foreign. The resistance is a grassroots resistance from within Afghanistan. Just like Sayyidina Hussein alayhi salam rose against Yazid, today Ahmad Massoud, he rose against these tyrants, these uh, and just like then, Yazid also called himself a Muslim, not just a Muslim, but the representative of Muslims. That's all I have to say.
And when you say, there's an option, something needs to be also a disclaimer that needs to be made clear is that this resistance does not want more war in this country in regards to they're not asking for another invasion. They're not asking for boots on the ground. I remember we mentioned earlier in the podcast, in the episode, that we said, well, people are afraid that there's gonna be another invasion or another war. That's a red line of this resistance. They're saying we can handle this. We're gonna defend ourselves here, but we need support. So people have to get that out of their minds too. That this is not going to be another invasion, another occupation, whatever you want to call it. That's not going to happen. One thing that I just want to end on, one point, and I'm done. We have to wrap this up because we wanted to be under an hour. Is the fact that if you are, for those who claim to be anti-imperialists, right? Well, it doesn't. Imperialism isn't just meant for America and Britain. It can come from within Muslim countries as well, right? The Taliban are a proxy force. They are also a branch of imperialism. You can't, or colonizers, whatever you want to say. That's what they're doing right now. So that needs to be made clear. Number two, from an Islamic perspective, we can't just blame everything on America or the West and say that the Taliban were just created and they're defending themselves, as a result of what America did. But when you look at their features and their characteristics and their ideology, our own Prophet, peace be upon him, prophesized the coming of such groups. So what are we going to say in reaction to that, right? When he describes groups such as the Khawarij and what they do, how they're like, they come out as seeming like the most pious of people, young men who recite the Quran, but it doesn't go past their throats, right? Who come from the east with long hair. He describes all. There's so many narrations, and you would think that it's literally describing the Taliban. So it's like, are we just going to ignore these things from an Islamic perspective? So who does this apply to, right? There were these type of groups existed from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, throughout Islamic history. There were these kind of splinter groups that were causing terror within the Ummah. Was the UK or America bombing those countries at the time? They didn't even exist. So were they bombing those countries and forcing these groups to come out? No. So from so many angles, there's just these inconsistencies and contradictions that don't work in regards to in when you're attempting to justify or whitewash the
Yeah.
Taliban.
They'll only
So that's
come
all I'm
out
gonna.
they'll only come
Mhm.
out and express their outrage the day that they see that their members, their podiums where they, or, their masajid, their mosques, there's less attendance. They're going to realize that it was by these actions or inaction that, as we said earlier, that this relationship between um, this kind of selective outrage and people denouncing their faith, that's when they'll
Yep.
they'll wake up, and and it may be too late. It may be too late in the sense that for them, for their mosques to be able to, you know
And if
sustain
they don't
themselves.
see it at their, and if they don't see it at their mosques, well, it's gonna happen in Afghanistan,
Yeah,
and it's happening to the diaspora. We see it. So
it's going to have a
there
ripple
these.
effect, I think.
Oh yeah, it will. And either way, you're gonna have to respond, and you're gonna have to answer to this
Yeah,
outcome.
absolutely.
So
Just one, we're done here with that. It was a great summary. I think much needed, that you just shared. I just want to end on this note. Actually, Prince Harry, you did a great job. That was you. That I saw the human in that writing. I saw a human being when I read that. As you said so by John earlier in this episode, he could have sugar coated that. He could have said it in plenty of other ways that would have still been completely fine. Um, his audience, his primary audience, being the West, would have cheered it on regard. However, he would have said it for those who are anti-terror, those who uh, know that those who he was speaking about were terrorists, right? But he addressed it so eloquently, and you saw humanity. So those who are uh, outraged by Prince Harry's remarks, please do a little bit of introspection and look into where that's coming from, because it's certainly not Islam. It's certainly not Islamic teachings. Yeah. Is that right, John? Anything else you'd like to add?
no, that's it for me. I think that was a very beneficial conversation. Hopefully, people will benefit from that, and I guess stay tuned for the next episode.
Yeah. Thank you guys for tuning in as always, and we'll see you around again soon.